Again, how is everybody? I just, if y'all ever have a down thought, or if you're just feeling a little low, I want y'all to do something on Sunday morning. If you're ever feeling just a little bit down about something, look over here at Roman and watch the way he watches his daddy. I mean, that is the funniest thing, because he was like turning his head around just to look at him and just grinning. And both those boys, they adore their father, and I think that's a beautiful picture. So if y'all ever need something to just lift you up just a little bit before we get started in preaching, then look over here at this. Watch these kids and look at their daddy. It's a beautiful sight. Now, Josh is probably be paying me to say that in a few years. So, but this morning I want us, if you will, to turn in your Bibles to the chapter to Nehemiah chapter 2. Nehemiah chapter 2. Nehemiah is a neat book. It's inexplicitly, it's basically unseparated from Ezra. When you read the book of Ezra, they go hand in hand. They're happening at pretty much the same time, and they serve two different purposes. But it's a beautiful way if you read both of them. But we're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 2 today, and as you can see, the title of my message is "Rebuilding with a Shared Purpose." And this is Nehemiah's vision and his leadership. Now, this is of Nehemiah. When you look at Nehemiah, well, first off, let me go and I'm going to read the verses that we're going to be focusing on. That's 11 through 20. So Nehemiah says, "So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. And I arose in the night, I and some few men with me, neither told I any man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, neither was there any beast with me save the beast that I rode upon. And I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, into the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. Then I went on to the gate of the fountain and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. Then I went up in the night by the brook and viewed the wall and turned back and entered by the gate of the valley and so returned. And the rulers knew not whither I went or what I did, neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. Then said I unto them, Ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's words, that he had spoken unto me. And they said, Let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us, and said, What is this thing you do? Will you rebel against the king? Then answered I them, and said unto them, The God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. But ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem." So as we look at the book of Nehemiah, who was Nehemiah? Nehemiah was just a regular Joe. Nehemiah was not a prophet. Nehemiah was not a priest. Nehemiah was a butler. Nehemiah was what is it that they say? He was a cup bearer. He was a cup bearer for the king, which was basically he was a trusted butler. Nehemiah was nobody special. Nehemiah had a heart for his people. Nehemiah loved his people. Nehemiah was concerned about his people. Nehemiah prayed about his people. Nehemiah, to go back in the story a little bit, in the scripture a little bit further, he called him his brother, had come back from Jerusalem, which we're not 100% sure, but we think it was his actual brother, who came back from Jerusalem with news. He asked him, how are my people? What's going on in Jerusalem? He said, you don't even want to know. He said, the walls are torn down. The gates have been burned. Your people are suffering, spiritually and physically. So it hit Nehemiah right square in the heart. And so he prayed. He prayed to God for his people. And God told him, go back and rebuild the wall. Well, Nehemiah, like I said, was just a regular guy. Nehemiah didn't have the money, nor did he have the power, nor did he have the authorization, other than that from God, to do what God is asking him to do. Go rebuild the wall. And there's a lot that goes into that, building the wall. It's figurative and physical, literal. But Nehemiah, for a period of about 4 months, dealt with this. He prayed about it. He knew what God was telling him to do, but he didn't really have any idea how to do it. So he was depressed. Nehemiah was a depressed man serving the king. And one day the king noticed it and asked Nehemiah, why are you so down? You've never been down around me. What's wrong? So Nehemiah told him, he said, my people are suffering. And the king said, well, what can I do to help? And when will you be back? Which I think is important. The king said, I'll help you out. But when are you coming back? Does that tell you how respected Nehemiah was? Even though he was in a position some people would consider less than. But God is fixing to use him mightily. So the king and the king's wife, it mentioned, said, what do you need from me? He said, I need letters. I need a way. So the king gave him letters. He said, I need letters for the king's force so I can get wood to rebuild the gates. And the king said, done. The king sent an entourage with him, sent a protection detail with Nehemiah, sent men to help him in his journey, to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. It's like I said, it's both figurative and literal. Not only is it rebuilding the actual walls of Jerusalem, which we'll see in a minute, but it is also putting up the walls of their faith. Rebuilding their faith scripturally by the representation of the walls of Jerusalem. Because the people of Jerusalem had been conquered, they had been abused, they had been mistreated, and they had really forgotten to a certain degree about their God. They needed a reminder. And rebuilding these walls was just that reminder. So Nehemiah travels to Jerusalem. And we have to understand about Nehemiah as far as who he was. He was a godly man. He was a prayerful man. He was mindful of the suffering of others. He cared, and he was a humble guy. And we know that because he humbled himself before God in prayer. But the king noticed his heartbroken condition and offered to help. He gave him what he needed, and he left to journey to Jerusalem. Now, as far as how long it took, we really don't know for sure. But it was long enough that when he got there, he said he was there for 3 days. And 3 days, which was kind of, really wonder what happened in those 3 days? Well, he rested. And I'll show you my proof of that in a minute. Same reason Ezra rested. Because Ezra also, when he went to Jerusalem, he was there 3 days. And the reason that we know that it was a period of rest is because of what he says in verse 12. In verse 12, he says, and I arose in the night. Now, that word in the Hebrew is kahum. Yeah, it's not easy to say. It's even harder to read. But kahum means to rise up, wake up, to get up after a night's sleep, after a rest. That word says, I arose, which means I got up after my rest. It basically has the sense of waking up in the morning. In fact, that's part of the definition, as it is to arise as in the morning. So he got up after his rest, and he got up after dark. Why in the world would Nehemiah get up at night and then go to the city walls? He had to survey everything that needed to be done. He needed to look at the walls and see what kind of shape they were in. But he didn't need everybody to know that's what he was doing. So he did it at night. And he only took a few people with him. He did it in secret. Now we say he going with the authorization of God and the king to rebuild the walls. Why in the world would you do it in secret? Why would you make your initial survey in secret? Because he didn't need those who opposed him to be able to build up a game plan. Because he knew there would be opposition. So sometimes we don't always want everybody to know what we're doing, right? Now, if your initial thought was because you don't want people to know what you're doing because you're doing something wrong, shame on you. Because that's not what Nehemiah was doing. Nehemiah was doing he had a righteous project, but he needed to get all of his ducks in a row first. He needed to get everything lined up. He needed to make a plan on what he was fixing to do. So sometimes we don't want everybody to know what we're doing, right? Sometimes it's prudent to keep it a secret. And he did just this. He kept it a secret until the right moment to present his plan to those he needed support from. But we look at what he did. He arose in the night. He said, I and some few men with me. So he had his trusted group of men with him. Probably had people that were going to advise him on what needed to be done and how it needed to be done. And I and some few men with me, neither told I any man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. So this is a secret. Neither was there any beast with me, save the beast that I rode upon. So he went out quietly to survey the walls of Jerusalem. He went out quietly to form a plan. And as he surveyed what needed to be done, you see here he went around the entire city to look to see what the walls needed. And then I went on the gate, it says, and I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, into the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. Then I went on to the gate of the fountain, into the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. So you see how bad the damage was. He couldn't even ride the donkey that he was riding. He couldn't even ride that through some of the areas that needed to be repaired. Then went I up in the night by the brook and viewed the wall and turned back and entered by the gate of the valley and so returned. So he went around the city. He looked at the walls to make a plan on how to rebuild. And he said he didn't tell anybody about it. So the guys that were with him knew something was up, and he was probably asking, hey, how would you do that if it needed to be done? How would you rebuild? So next, in verse 17, or let's look at 16, I'm sorry. And it said, and the rulers knew not whither I went. Now this is very important. He's telling you who the important ones are. Who is going to need in on what's going on to accomplish this project. He said, and the rulers knew not whither I went or what I did. Neither had I yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. So he didn't tell the political leaders. He didn't tell the religious leaders. He didn't tell the governors, the mayors. He didn't even tell the blue-collar guys that he hadn't told anybody that yet. But then in 17, he said, then I said unto them, and them is all those that were mentioned in the scripture before. He made it public knowledge. I went to them and I told all those who needed to know. And some that didn't. Because he told everybody. Then I said unto them, you see the distress that we are in. You see how depressed everybody in this town is. You see the problems that we're facing. Our city is in ruin. Basically, it says Jerusalem lay in waste. So Jerusalem is in ruin. Physically and spiritually. And the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, let us build the wall. That's a vision. Right? So what is Nehemiah doing here? He's sharing his vision. This is what I see. This is what needs to be done. And we can do it. Let us build this wall. And I know if anybody in here is thinking that's a political statement, it is not. Nehemiah is talking about rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. Let us build this wall. Let us rise, he says. Well, wait a minute. He said, let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a disgrace. King James says reproach. Let us no more be a reproach. Let us no longer be ashamed of the condition in which we're living. Let us stand up for ourselves and for our God, and let's do the work that He has sanctioned. Don't hide from it. Don't retreat from it. Don't be embarrassed about it. Stand up and do what God has asked us to do. So that we don't have to be ashamed. Now, I'm going to step back just a minute. I'm going to step right out of here and I'm going to say, why is it that we don't share Jesus Christ? Mostly. I'm embarrassed. I don't know enough. Or I don't care enough. Ooh, that one's big, isn't it? Is it that we don't care enough? Or is it we don't care enough to put ourselves in a place of imposition? I don't care enough to embarrass myself. I don't care enough to put myself out there. I don't care enough to open myself up to ridicule and persecution. I think that's very important. Because that is all an excuse. We can excuse it and say, well, I don't know enough about the Bible. Whose fault is that? I don't know enough to witness for Jesus Christ. You know enough to witness for Jesus Christ because you know what He did in your heart. You know what He's done for you. That's your testimony. Nehemiah here is telling them, hey, let's build the wall of Jerusalem. He's getting them fired up. And we'll see here in just a minute how he got them fired up by sharing his vision. But what he did is he was prepared when he shared that vision. He went, he rested, he prayed, he surveyed what needed to be done, and then he presented his project. And when he presented it, he said, then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me. God had opened up all these doors for Nehemiah. Now, I want us to understand something here, which I had pretty much saved for the conclusion. But this point here, I want us to really come to acknowledge the fact that Nehemiah was a nobody. Nehemiah was, again, not a priest. He wasn't a prophet. He was an everyday guy that God has used to rally the people to perform a task with a shared vision, with a shared purpose, to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. He came to this place and this decision, and he also brought to this place by whom he was authorized. Because he said, Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me. Singular. He's claiming that, isn't he? My God, who was good upon me. As also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. So we'll see here in just a minute, somebody uses the king as a deterrent, but he's already saying right here, he said, God is the main focus. God was good, my God was good to me, but the king was too. So, a very secondary position of authorization. But God was the focus. God was the center of everything that Nehemiah is doing. The people were on board. And we see that in that continuation of verse 18. And it said, and they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. Let us rise up. Again, kahum, that Hebrew term. Let us rise up from sleep. Let us rise up from a position of doing nothing. So that takes on a little bit more meaning, doesn't it? These people were fired up and they said, let's get to it. Let's do it. Let's get busy. Let's get up off our duff and do something. They had sat long enough. They had sat and done nothing for long enough. And Nehemiah, a butler from the king's court, comes in and says, let's do something. God has authorized. God has been good to me. The king has told me I can do it. Let's do something. I'm a nobody. And God has told me to do this. And they followed him. They worked side by side with Nehemiah. But then, what happens is most all projects, what happens in most projects, there's opposition. And let me tell you something about this opposition. This opposition did not necessarily come from the outside. This opposition didn't come from Terrell Road. This opposition came from right here in this house. Because 2 of the 3 that opposed Nehemiah were Israelites. Who was the opposition? Sanballat the Horonite. He was a political leader. He was probably making money hand over fist from the depressed state of the Hebrew people. He was a governor of Samaria. And he was from the tribe of Ephraim. So, he was an Israelite. Horon, or Horon, is a small town just north of Jerusalem. Second, Tobiah the Ammonite. He was a servant to the Ammonite king. Some translations say he was a slave. But he was from the tribe of Gad. So again, he was an Israelite. The third one mentioned is Geshem the Arabian. Now, this is probably the one who was not an Israelite, although there are some that argue that he may have been. I can't prove one way or the other. But he was a court official. He was a legal representative. He probably, like I said, was not an Israelite, but he still, just like the other two, looked to lose financial prowess and power from the walls of Jerusalem getting rebuilt. What is the thing that the people that govern want to do to their subjects? They want to keep them down, don't they? How do they do that? They don't let them stand up. They can tax them into submission. They can threaten them into submission, which is probably what happened with all of this. But now, here comes Nehemiah, a nobody from Susa, who came in and said, we can do this because God has got our back. God is who is pushing us, so we can do it. And so now, they get a little strength. They get a little boldness to them. Now, the people who are making money off of that are scared. And so how does a bully work? In our society today, we have so much of that, anti-bullying and things like that. But how does a bully work? He usually... Sir? Intimidation, exactly. He gets a little something over your head, and he exposes it, and he makes it larger than it is, and he makes you scared to stand up to him. And we have all been told, some of us understand it, some of us have done it. How do you get a bully to quit bullying you? You stand up to him. You make him shake your hand. You make him look you in the eye, and you let him know you're not scared. And that's what the people of Jerusalem were now doing. And these governors, these rulers, these people who were making the money now said, y'all are making fools of yourself. They start laughing at them. How is it to affect a human psyche better than anything? Is to laugh at them, to make them feel small. So right here, it says, but Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, and they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what is this thing ye do? Will you rebel against the king? Because rebellion was a big thing back then. Rebellion meant death. Rebellion meant total disregard for authority. So they're laughing at him. Oh, you're foolish, you can't do that. But even if you are, you really want to rebel against the king? And the king's already told them they can do it. Nehemiah knew that. So what does Nehemiah say? Nehemiah says, the God of heaven, He will prosper us. Again, he's saying the king don't matter. Because the God of heaven has our back. That is the authorization that Nehemiah carried to Jerusalem. God, the ultimate authority, has approved this plan. And He will cause us to succeed. And that's what that word prosper means. He will cause us to succeed in this job that we have started. Therefore, since He has the power to make it happen, we will do what He's ordained us to do. That's what Nehemiah is telling them. Verse 20, the God of heaven, He will prosper us. Therefore, we, His servants, will arise, again, same term, and build. But you have no portion. You have no right. And you have no memorial. Which is saying they have cut themselves off from their people. You have betrayed your people, and you have no claim, nor will you have claim to this. Basically, they're saying you ought to be ashamed. You sold out your people. And that's something we see a lot of today, isn't it? Dollar bill has a lot of power in our world, doesn't it? Nehemiah was just a regular guy. Nehemiah prayed. He listened to God, which I think is very, very important. We can have a prayer life, but if you don't listen for an answer, you're spinning your wheels. He prayed. He listened. He prayed some more. He presented his idea to the king, who said, "What can I do to help?" So then he did it again. He went to Jerusalem. He prayed for 3 days and rested. He surveyed. He gathered a plan. And then he presented his plan to the people who would actually do the work. Because Nehemiah by himself couldn't have done it. We know that. But what is he saying here? What is he showing here? That it doesn't take a pastor to reach out to the community and get something done for God. It's not always the pastor's job, is it? This guy was a deacon at best. As an example of our local assembly. This guy was somebody that said, I have a concern. He saw a need. He prayed for a solution to that need. And then he received tools and the help that he needed. It's not too late in our country for revival. It's scary how many people have just given up. How many people will look at this world today and just say, it's a lost cause. Come on, Jesus, come. Hurry it up. The quicker you come, the better off we'll be. I don't know about you, but I want people that I know and love that have not accepted Christ, I want them to have a little bit more time. And is it an uphill battle to fight against Satan and evil and wickedness in this world? Absolutely. But let me tell you something. Who's pushing us up the hill? Jesus is pushing us up the hill. And He's not pushing us all the time, y'all. Just so y'all know, Jesus is not sitting behind you pushing you all the time. He's there when you fall. He wants us to do it, but He's there to support us. He has authorized this project of growing the kingdom. Our government, our kings today fight us. They're not authorizing our work, are they? But our God is. Our government can fill the shoes of Sanballat. But our God is still more powerful than our government. It is not too late in this country for revival. And we should fight for it as such. Instead of just throwing our hands and saying, I'm going to let Jesus come. Because He'll fix it in the end. You're absolutely right. He will. But we have a responsibility here, y'all. We have a responsibility as a church. We have a responsibility to be united in a shared purpose. Nehemiah united the people of Jerusalem for a shared purpose, to rebuild the wall, to show the world that their faith wasn't dead. Are we building walls today? A lot of Christians are. A lot of Christians are building walls for the wrong reason. They're building walls to keep themselves in instead of keeping wickedness out. Because when you build a wall to keep yourself in, you lock yourself inside of a box. When you rebuild the walls and you rebuild the gates, that means you can get out and witness for the kingdom. But if you build a wall to keep yourself in, you forget the gate. Nobody gets in or out. Are we guilty? Are some of our churches guilty of building walls without gates around our churches? That's something to think about, isn't it? We are called to be separate, not secluded. We are called to pray for each other. But that doesn't mean we don't pray for others. We have to build walls with gates. Because otherwise we're just stuck right here in these walls and not doing a thing. We are not rising up and building walls. We are not rising up and building the kingdom. We have slept for too long as Christians. So my challenge this week is to rise up. Rise up. Build your wall with a gate. With a pretty gate. Why would you say, Brother Jeff, why would you say build a pretty gate? Because if it's a pretty gate, people won't know what's inside. People want to know. They're curious. Build a wall, but build gates so you can go out and tell others about Jesus. And how is the best way in the world to shine your light for Jesus? One, surrender. Let Him light the fire. Two, get involved with a New Testament church. Because let me tell you, the avenues of serving Him are far greater inside the walls of a New Testament healthy church. And I say that, healthy is a very important part of that. Otherwise, we're dying. And when we build a wall with no gates, that's what we're doing. We're dying. Like I said, walls and gates take on all kinds of different looks, don't they? This wall looks different from the wall over at the parsonage. This wall looks different from the wall over at the fellowship hall. They look different, but they need to serve the same purpose. We all need to unite to serve one purpose, and that's the kingdom, to serve Jesus Christ. But it starts with a relationship with Him, personal relationship with Jesus. Then you become a part of a body of a local New Testament church. As we have a song of invitation,